Triangles, Eric. Why are they so scary?
They're pointy.
Well, we've talked about triangles before. The most notable, of course, being the Bermuda Triangle.
Alaskan Triangle.
The Alaskan Triangle. And yet there's still so many more triangles for some reason. And I came across the story of the Bennington Triangle.
Which I had never heard of.
Now, the reason I heard this story, if you'll bear with me for a moment, I decided I was going to start reading Stephen King books. Again, I hadn't read any in a long time. And I really like Stephen King's, but there's still quite a few I haven't read. And, of course, me being me, I had to have a process. So I was going to read them in the order they were published.
Oh.
And I got to Salem's Lot. And there's a line in Salem's Lot that references a spate of strange disappearances in Vermont in the 40s and 50s. And I thought, well, is that true? I mean, did that really happen? Because if it did, it'd be a really neat idea for a podcast. So I looked it up, and sure enough,
I like the way your mind thinks.
you have the Bennington Triangle, which was the location for a series of strange disappearances, as well as all sorts of other high strangeness and weirdness like any of these other triangles. But mainly, it's the disappearances that have made it newsworthy. And that's our topic for tonight, the Bennington Triangle.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
I do want to start by saying the phrase Bennington Triangle was coined by author Joseph A. Citro, who is apparently like a folklorist of Vermont lore. He looks into that. That's his study. But he first used that term during a public radio broadcast in 1992 to describe an area of southwestern Vermont where 5 people disappeared between 1945 and 1950. And like I said, it also has UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, strange lights, strange sounds, strange creatures, a phantom hitchhiker, a wild man. And this is a place said to be cursed according to Native American lore, with Algonquin legend warning of a malevolent stone in the mountains that they called the man-eating stone, and it would open up and devour anyone unlucky enough to step on it. To this day, no living soul has seen this stone and lived to tell the tale.
So obviously there's no way to know where it's at.
According to Citro, quote, "No one alive has seen this dangerous anomaly on Glastonbury Mountain. Native Americans knew of it and warned people away. We can only imagine it as a sizable rock, large enough to stand on. But when someone stands upon it, the rock becomes less solid and, like a living thing, swallows the unfortunate trespasser." Now, the exact area encompassed by this triangle is not clearly defined, but it is centered on Glastonbury Mountain, and would include most of the area of the towns immediately surrounding it: Bennington, Woodford, Shaftesbury, and Somerset, with some towns having been abandoned over the years, essentially ghost towns in the region. It covers an area of about 100 square miles of mostly untouched, pristine wilderness, mostly consisting of rugged mountainous terrain.
Now, a big portion of that, if I'm not mistaken, is like national refuge, protected
land,
areas.
national park type land.
So going back to our, Bigfoot stuff before, that seems to be a hot spot because obviously
national
nobody
park disappearances.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. Well, not to steal from tonight's main focus of the Bennington Triangle in Vermont, but as Bill was alluding, just to kind of add a bit more understanding and accountability, this is just one of many triangles, or I will say regions, because some of these, while they may be called triangles, is more of kind of a blob, depending on which points you might want to consider.
I mean, when you look at, say, the Bermuda Triangle, there are 3 points on the map where most things are concentrated in there, but it's really that area.
Yeah, there's a lot of the disappearances outside of that that's still Bermuda Triangle.
To define these areas as triangles is essentially just picking 3 points and going, okay, well, around this area here.
This catches most of it, but I'll bet our listeners are familiar with, as we had mentioned, the granddaddy of all, Bermuda Triangle, but equally there are at least 12, that's right, a dozen or more similar locations across the world. Intriguing enough, there are 6 of these that lie above the equator and 6 lie below the equator, almost like in some strange algorithmic eerie pattern.
Are they directly opposite each other?
They are not.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to look for some designs and patterns, but I did think out of the 12 that I found listed, the bigger ones, 6 above, 6 below. This is kind of weird.
Well, and like I said, this will be our 3rd triangle episode.
Yes. Well, number 1, most famous, hands down, the Bermuda or Devil's Triangle. We actually featured this on episode number 62 of our podcast back in February of 2024 or 23. I can't remember.
This is 2024, so no. It was older than that.
Our podcast episode number 62 back in February a year or 2 ago. Number 2, the Algerian megaliths. Now, this is an ancient burial site of strange advanced ruins in the desert region of the Sahara. Like its counterpart, compasses seem to go crazy wacko here. Pilots flying overhead often simply just vanish into the desert off the radar without leaving a trace. People brave enough to travel to the site and its surroundings report kind of this strange dark aura that not only can be seen but felt, like a heaviness, a presence of all the anomalies, and it affects electronics and stuff. Number 3, Mohian Yojara in Pakistan. Now, this was built by yet another seemingly advanced technology that seems to vanish without a trace. Then we have number 4, the Dragon's Triangle. This is in Japan, also called the Devil's Sea. It's kind of a vile vortex. There is an underwater city that is dubbed Japan's Atlantis that lies kind of there in the center of it. Again, one of these seemingly advanced civilization kind of stories. And since the precision cut and stacked building formations of that site undersea, it is similar to the Bermuda Triangle, claiming that many ships and planes that now go over top of that definitely kind of relates. Captains and pilots often report strange storms that appear out of nowhere, compasses spinning, even the stars being out of alignment when they're inside that triangle area looking up. There is it's an area considered so dangerous, the Japanese government actually now forbids anyone from diving in that area without a very long, complex, paperwork trail of getting approval. Number 5, the Hamakawila volcano in Hawaii. Now, that's located in what is known as the Ring of Fire. Locals treat it with utmost respect, with strange electrical malfunctions and, again, missing planes that fly over. Then, of course, we have Easter Island. Now, again, this is one, definitely, it's not a triangle, but Easter Island is another mainstay that most of us have heard of. But were you aware of all the strange and unexplained occurrences that often mimic the Bermuda Triangle and others like it? It's located there in Polynesia, where you can find nearly 900 giant statues weighing on average 9 tons each. And again, it's how in the world could these be made and moved? But more importantly, tonight's relation is when you fly over top, again, it seems to have weird pulls with magnetic forces. Number 7, the South Atlantic Anomaly. Pretty vague. A vague name located off the eastern coast of South America where everything wants to kill you. This is a strange location indeed. Pilots and captains that enter that area often report amnesia, forgetting where they are or losing large sections of time. It's such a paranormal hotspot that even satellites can't seem to capture a non-blemished image. The images often come back blurred or faulty, even the ones that NASA have attempted to take from space. Even scientists weigh in on the possible cause. They like to shun the paranormal beliefs. They have proven that the Earth's magnetic bands are at the weakest point here of all the places on the Earth. And while they don't understand necessarily why, they seem to think, and it does lend to explain why the compasses and even electronic gadgets may go wacky. Number 8, the Great Zimbabwe. Kind of sounds like a theme park, but it isn't as welcoming as the name suggests. It's actually another megalith compound housing at one time up to 20,000 people. but today it's simply a ghost town. However, in its heyday, it was a thriving metropolis whose people just seemed to vanish. No signs or records of any major migration, not even warring factions. Heck, not even the stories or folklore have been passed down among the natives in the area of the region. It's just like they walked away one day and vanished. Number 9, the Wharton Basin, off the western coast of Australia, again, where everything wants to try to kill you. It's yet another triangle anomaly in the Indian Ocean that reports many strange geological events. Some consider it to be a true portal, which refers to the Alaskan Triangle, which I'll talk about here in a bit, where planes have been reported to vanish from radar in an instant, a place where earthquakes spring up back to back, sometimes simultaneously for hours. And one might speculate, well, surely it must be two tectonic plates that meet up here, but that's not the case at all. It lies well within a single plate of the land. Number 10, the Loyalty Islands, again located off the coast of Australia. Here we go again. On the opposite eastern side now, it's yet another triangle-shaped vector of doom. Here, a lot of strange whirlpools are found here in the South Pacific, but then there's the case of the Vanishing Island in 2012. But now many argue that that particular island that was charted there on numerous maps throughout the centuries never existed at all. It was simply a mistake of plotting the wrong coordinates by one poor guy one night that was maybe drunk at sea, and apparently every map maker for many, many decades and centuries afterwards just included the island. However, in 2012, they went to find it, and the entire island had vanished. 11 and 12 we throw together as the North and South Poles, obviously on opposite sides of our little planet Earth, yet they have some things in common. Number 1, they got a lot of ice. Number 2, a lot of strange disappearances. On the North Pole, one such disappearance involved 129 men who simply vanished until they were discovered again 150 years later. Yet, as the case may be, the South Pole has a story even more bizarre. When scientific researchers uncovered frozen bodies of what appeared to be alien-like races of beings straight out of Close Encounters. Back about 50 years ago, it was a story that quickly was swept under the rug and then hushed from the 1940s. Now, there are obviously a few others, and I like to throw in our lucky number 13, which we talked about, the Alaskan Triangle, and we featured that on episode 111 back in April of 2023. So what on earth is going on in all these locations? Why are they all reporting similar electronic anomalies, compasses spiraling out of control, and then all the disappearances? One thing in particular, they all fall upon what is known as ley lines, often associated with religious sites or points of great importance to civilization, as well as different burial grounds. And yes, the Bennington Triangle is located many points upon these said ley lines.
So now that we've talked about the strangeness of triangles,
being on ley lines,
which does seem to pop into a lot of the weird, mysterious things. I think, what was it, Lake Michigan? We did Lake Michigan and the strangeness there. The Lake Michigan Triangle, I forgot about that one.
Yep, there's another one.
And it was said to lay along a ley line.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the episode we did on some of the national forest disappearances was actually referenced to some of the ley line points.
So we'll go back to the Bennington Triangle.
By the way, I would love to have a map with all these supposed ley lines. Wouldn't that be interesting? You could actually put that up.
I imagine that's out there somewhere.
I'm sure that's out there.
I'm sure we could find something.
I'm going to have to look for one of those. Sorry to interrupt.
So anyway, back to the Bennington Triangle in Vermont, this area of untouched wilderness and rugged mountainous terrain. There are what we call the 5 canonical disappearances attributed to the triangle. Now, I'm going to say 5 main or 5 canonical. But these
canonical, that's the word for the day.
Yeah. These 5 disappearances all happened between 1945 and 1950. And
5-year period, 5 disappearances.
With one exception, none of the bodies were ever recovered. Now, where there is some alternative possible explanation, we will include that. There's a couple of these stories that, potentially have other explanations than just strangeness. But the fact that even in such a small area, you have such a large number of disappearances that are highly unexplainable, I mean, that's pretty strange. The first is the disappearance of Mitty Rivers. Now, this happened on November 12th, 1945. 74-year-old Mitty disappeared while out hunting in the vicinity of Long Trail, and that's important, Long Trail Road, and Vermont Route 9. Now, Mitty, by all accounts, was an experienced woodsman, avid hunter. He'd been out there a lot. So, he was familiar with the terrain.
He knew the area.
So he was on a weekend hunting trip with 4 other hunters in the mountains. But on the morning of November 12th, Rivers and his son-in-law, Joe, were walking along, and they reached a place where Rivers was. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go. I don't know if he was going to go scout or whatever, but he's like, we're going to go ahead and split up here. You head back to camp. I'm going to go on up a little ways. I'm going to check this out, and then I'm going to be back for lunch. So Joe takes off back to camp. Mitty takes off his own way. As the afternoon rolls on and Mitty doesn't make it back to camp, of course, the rest of the hunting party begins to get concerned. They go out searching for Mitty. Now, they find no sign of him, so they reach out to authorities, say, hey, we've got a missing person here. There was an extensive search conducted over the next few days that involved about 300 concerned locals, as well as soldiers from the U.S. Army Fort Devens nearby in Massachusetts. The only evidence they ever found was a single rifle cartridge in a stream, which, they theorized that maybe he had been over to get a drink of water, been over to pick something up,
just
whatever. Fell out of his pocket.
Now, that whole search lasted a total of 8 days, again, with over 300 people, feet on the ground, looking for him. So very intense.
Now, many have figured that Rivers would eventually return since, a man with his experience in the woods would be able to survive for quite a while. Even though they did say he was sort of unfamiliar with the wilderness in this particular area. He hadn't hunted there very much, but, he was still an experienced woodsman. But Mitty would never be seen again.
And they kind of theorized that maybe it was an animal attack, but again, there was no blood.
They never found any evidence of that.
There was, you would think you would find some ripped clothing, a boot, absolutely nothing except for the one rifle clip. Well, I'll move on to the second, and I will
most famous,
unarguably, the most publicized case, and that was of Paula Weldon, the daughter of a wealthy family, which might have something to do with why it was so publicized. A year later, after Mitty's disappearance, 18-year-old college student Paula Weldon went hiking on, again, the Long Trail on Sunday, December 1st, 1946. She was wearing a bright red jacket. Several people had seen her, leave.
She'd asked some fellow students to join her, but everybody said they were too busy.
It was like they're around the holidays and stuff, and either they had gone with their families or was, they decided they wasn't going to go anywhere. So, so she ends up, leaving herself. Several people mentioned seeing her literally leaving the campus. One store employee in Bennington said they had actually given her directions.
As she was on her way to the trail, she was sort of hitchhiking for a certain part of it and was picked up by Lewis Knapp. And he gave her a ride down Route 67A, took her as far as the entrance to his driveway, which was 2 miles from the trailhead where he dropped her off and she finished going on up that way. And it was cold. I think it was about 50 degrees that day, and it was forecasted to drop to as low as 9 by that night.
Then there was an elderly couple who were actually hiking about 100 yards from or behind her for a period of time. There was no concern until the college sophomore failed to attend her classes at Bennington College the next morning. Now, afterward, an extensive search was conducted. Again, she's from a wealthy family, so it was reported rather quickly, and money probably wasn't near as big of an obstacle. So it was to include 1,000 people searching, including aircraft surveillance, and they even posted a $5,000 reward and help from the FBI. The elderly couple who had seen her on the trail said that she seemingly disappeared after she turned a particular corner on the trail. Now, during the massive search, no clues whatsoever to her fate were ever discovered.
Now, alternatively, there is some stories about this. One said that someone had seen her in an argument during her hitchhiking, and that maybe that argument was, maybe a secret boyfriend or something. And then apparently there was a woman matching her description seen in some nearby towns over the next couple of years, to the point where I think they checked into a hotel or something using her last name, and they got a picture of her and they gave it to the parents, but it wasn't her. Her father criticized the authorities' lack of sophisticated methods in handling the case so much and so publicly. This case actually served as motivation for the founding of the Vermont State Police 7 months later.
Wow.
Now, the next disappearance would be that of James E. Tedford. He disappeared on December 1st, 1949. This was 3 years to the day after Weldon's disappearance.
3 years to the day and the third missing person.
Now, Tedford was a resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home. He was a retired Army veteran from World War I, and he had been to St. Albans visiting his wife, Pearl. His brother-in-law, Earl, accompanied him to the local bus station, which was the last place he would ever be seen. According to family, he was apparently very sad that the visit was coming to an end. It didn't really seem like he wanted to go back. And I mean, I could understand. Now, according to witnesses, Tedford was one of 14 passengers on the bus that were on board at the last stop before Bennington. Somewhere between this last stop and Bennington, Tedford disappeared.
They know he got on the bus.
He was on the bus. They saw him on the bus. They never saw him get off the bus. His belongings were still in the luggage rack, and his bus schedule was still on his seat.
It was like he got up maybe to go to the bathroom or something and use the restroom and just vanished.
No one saw him get off the bus either before or at Bennington. Again, relatives said he seemed pretty sad at the end of the visit, and there is a theory that maybe he didn't want to return to the veterans' home, and that rather than just slowly waste away, he just took off. And they're much like with
kind of went off to die, so to speak.
Well, much like with Weldon, apparently there was a man matching his description that showed up in some neighboring towns over the next few weeks or months or however long. But yeah, no one ever, identified him specifically.
Well, it does kind of lend itself to that belief because, I mean, he left his luggage, he left his clothing. Yeah. I mean,
you would still need those things, I would think.
Yeah. And that we're talking December still, 1949. So yeah, I would think you would want some different clothes. And
so there was a Tony Jinks. So I'm not sure his relation to the situation, but he discussed the claim once, saying that, quote, "The popular conception is that he vanished into thin air while on the bus. But like many missing person stories, there's a gap between when he was last seen and when he was reported missing a week or so later. So regarding Tedford's disappearance, there's enough evidence to suggest that he didn't dematerialize, even though no trace was ever found."
Makes sense. Our fourth missing person case is an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson. Now, this brings us to October 12th, 1950. This 8-year-old boy, Paul Jepson, went missing in the area. Now, Jepson had been playing in the cab of a pickup truck there in the Bennington area when his mother left him briefly to go tend to her pigs.
Well, you say briefly. She thought it was going to be briefly.
It ended up being a little bit longer.
It ended up being, yeah, but apparently her and her husband worked as caretakers at a local dump. And for some reason, this involved the feeding of 65 pigs.
That's a lot of pigs.
It is.
That's a lot of pigs. When she returned, about an hour later, the boy was gone. Now, after looking for him in the immediate area, he was reported missing to the authorities, and hundreds of people assembled in a search party. Bloodhounds were brought in to search for the boy, which did pick up a successful scent, and they followed it towards Glastonbury Mountain. Again, you're going to see certain names, locations, mountains, and such brought up continually. But it was lost, or his scent was lost at a nearby crossroads, suggesting possibly an abduction by a motorist that may have been traveling by.
According to local folklore, that would also be the last place that Weldon was actually seen. Although you do have the account of the couple on the trail that saw her too. So,
Now, the boy's father said Paul had been talking about visiting the mountains for several days, though the area was searched for several days and no clues, again, no remains whatsoever of the boy were ever found, no personal belongings. Again, kind of this crossroad point, like with one of the other missing cases, the elderly couple seen her kind of come up to the bend in the mountain here and just apparently vanished, just disappeared.
Well, 16 days later, Frida Langer, age 53, and her cousin, Herbert Elsner, left their family campsite near the Somerset Reservoir to go hiking. Unfortunately, just a few yards from their camp, Langer slipped and fell into a stream, soaking her clothes and her shoes. So, not wanting to hike in wet clothing, which I think would be miserable.
Absolutely.
She told Elsner, "Hey, if you just wait a minute, I'm going to go back to the camp, change into some dry clothes and stuff. I'm going to catch back up to you." Well, he was okay with that. She took off, headed back towards camp. He waited what he considered a perfectly reasonable amount of time, and then waited some more. Finally, he made his way back to camp, only to discover that Frida had never come back to camp.
Never made it back, yeah.
She never made it back. and no one had seen her since they had left on their hike. Now, she had seemingly vanished in just the short distance between where they were standing at the stream and their camp, which again, not that far.
Yeah, did you get an actual distance of how far it was? I couldn't find it, but in all accounts, it seemed like a very short distance.
It said just a few hundred yards.
Okay, so yeah, not much at all. Now, this also, interestingly, again, another name, was at Glastonbury Mountain area.
So over the next 2 weeks, 5 searches were conducted that involved aircraft, helicopters, and up to 300 searchers. No trace of her body was found during the search. Now, I want to say during the search.
Yes.
7 months later, May 12th, 1951, her body was found 3.5 miles from the campsite.
First body, any signs of any of the victims ever found.
Her body was found in the eastern branch of the Deerfield River near the Somerset Reservoir, an area, notably, that had been extensively searched multiple times while they were searching for her. Now, no cause of death could be definitively determined due to the condition of her remains, although it was speculated since her body was found near water, many suspected that she may have drowned. Hers is the only body ever found out of the 5 canonical disappearances. Now, I did stumble across one additional disappearance which could be linked to the Bennington Triangle.
Ooh.
This is the story of 16-year-old Martha Jeanette Jones, November 1950. Jones was reported missing after hitchhiking to seminary school in Manchester, Vermont. Now, the crazy part of this, to me, is that no one noticed she was missing for an entire month.
Whoa.
The school assumed that she had gone home and stayed there. Family assumed she had returned to school and made it, and nothing ever happened. Again, almost a month.
And that would have been before the last Langer case we talked about.
Now, over the years, no direct connections have been identified that tie these cases together other than the general geographic area and the time period, with all 5 of the canonical victims disappearing mid-afternoon between 3 to 4 p.m., not far from each other where they disappeared, during the last 3 months of the year. Some people claim maybe there's a serial killer at work. None of the victims fit any kind of profile. They have no similarities, no common factors. So the odds of it being a serial killer seem pretty slim. Others blame the Indian curse or somehow that this area is a window into the paranormal. The Bennington Triangle was featured as one of the haunted locations on the TV series Most Terrifying Places in America in 2018, when the episode told the stories of the missing persons in that 5-year span that we talked about. But they also touched on the local lore of the Bennington Monster. And you know me.
Monster.
If there's a monster involved, I'm going to have to look it up. The Bennington Monster is a Bigfoot-like creature that supposedly terrorizes the Glastonbury Mountain area, with one of the earliest reported sightings happening in the early 1800s, when a stagecoach full of passengers was forced to stop in the driving rain when the trail ahead was washed out. The driver noticed after he'd stopped that there were huge footprints in the mud, much too big to be that of a human. Not long after, the coach was attacked by a giant creature that knocked the stagecoach on its side.
That's a powerful monster.
That's strong. The passengers later said that they could only see a pair of eyes before the monster roared and ran back into the woods. Now, later sightings would describe the creature as a large, hairy, black thing over 6 feet tall. Another disappearance related to the Bennington Triangle and to the monster here was that of Carl Herrick in 1943. Now, you could say this would be the first strange disappearance in the Bennington Triangle, but I kind of threw it more in with the monster, and you'll see why. Herrick went missing during a hunting trip with his cousin Henry. They were about 10 miles northeast of Glastonbury when they got separated. Now, when Henry couldn't find Carl, he contacted the authorities, and Carl's body was found 3 days later, surrounded by giant, mysterious footprints. Some people say they were bear, but a lot of people say they were not. His gun was nearby, with no bullets fired. His autopsy concluded that he had been squeezed to death.
Ooh.
Which is not very bear-like. Bears will savage you.
Yes.
He was squeezed to the point that his ribs punctured his lungs. So, whatever got a hold of him, put the hurt on.
Loved him big time. Well, the Indians of the area knew this area well, and they avoided it. Bill alluded to that earlier. The Algonquin legend warned of this stone that was up in the mountains that would open up and devour anyone. They also had beliefs that there was a Bigfoot Sasquatch-like creature, which they said they lived along in harmony with, but it was very defined areas. You didn't go to his hunting grounds, he wouldn't come to their hunting grounds. So there was a long history of this type of paranormal, whatever you want to call it, beliefs of going on. Now, I did find where the region here was really kind of struggling financially, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but they had decided they wanted to really kind of push the national conservation, the protected wildlife, the protected forest. And so they started raising money to make this trail that you could walk all the way up through the Bennington Triangle there in the mountainous range. And it was something that took many, many years to complete. And again, as mountains go, I mean, you can only do so much to create trails. Mountains are going to have some landslides, things are going to shift, but that's what kind of really started this allure. So the question was, well, if their history was there all the way back in the time of the Algonquin Indians, the 5 major disappearance cases that we're talking about was definitely like in the 40s and the 50s. What about everything in between? Well, to be quite honest, it was just kind of untouched territory. The reason probably why we started having these disappearances was after they completed this walking path, trying to get tourism increased to help the area in particular with their financial, hoping to kind of put them back on the map, so to speak. And it did, but not necessarily for the reasons that they had hoped. And then you have to stop and ask, well, what happened when, at the end of these 5 major cases, why did it all abruptly stop? And I think Bill may be alluding to, did it really stop?
Clearly, strange and bad things did not stop.
Yes.
I did have another story here of the wild man. He entered into the story in the 1892 time frame, which I found stories of 1890s and then I heard stories from the 1860s, but they all seem to be very similar. The 1890 one seemed to be more detailed. But basically, a man working at the sawmill hit another man over the head with a rock and killed him.
Ooh.
After hearing voices telling him to attack his coworker. Well, the authorities committed the killer to a mental health facility. I guess they had a pretty liberal, outdoor time policy. And he went out one day and he just never came back. So rumors spread that he had fled up into the mountains and he lived there as a hairy, deranged wild man. And that he would, at times, travel down from the wilderness, apparently for the whole sole purpose of exposing himself to the women in the towns of Bennington and Glastonbury.
A flasher.
While holding a gun.
Oh.
So that gets your attention. Local folklore says he never died and that he still roams the mountains to this day. Now, if you do some math, by the time the disappearances in the 50s happened, this guy would have been 90. So even if he was the culprit, I mean, it's pretty doubtful, right?
Right.
He's probably dead.
Yeah. Getting off topic here a little bit, but, we were talking about, said the wild man sightings. I believe you said as early as 1890s, but as 1860s. I hope Hollywood's listening. Anybody in Hollywood, attention, because we're getting off topic, but why has no one made a movie about the Civil War time frame where they encounter a Sasquatch in the woods? Because 1860s is definitely right during that time. How cool would that be? And we were sitting around saying, Hollywood keeps remaking all these films. And there's nothing new and original. By golly, that's original. So someone in Hollywood, feel free to take this, run with it. Just give Nightmares on the Lost Highway a little plug somewhere, maybe in the fine print.
Well, finally, I have the story of Robert Singley, a 27-year-old composer who decided he was going to hike the Long Trail.
The Long Trail.
Now, he started not too far from where Paula Weldon was last seen, depending on which version of the story you hear. And while following the trail, he was doing a good job as far as he could tell of just, following that blazed path, when he started to become confused and unaware of exactly where he was going in the dense fog that settled in. And eventually he found himself completely lost. When he tried to retrace his steps, he found the trail seemed different. There were fallen trees or other distinctive features that he didn't remember seeing when he came in. In his own words, right before I lost the trail, everything crescendoed into this weird sort of dizzying confusion. It just suddenly got dark, and then it was like, where am I? What's going on? I was totally lost. What was supposed to be a quick hike turned into an all-night excursion, forcing him to stay the night in the woods, which he was luckily able to survive by building a fire to keep him warm throughout the night. He sheltered up under a large maple tree, which he said expelled a weird, haunting energy. Now, despite being an experienced hiker, he had ended up hiking 5 miles in the wrong direction.
Ow, that's pretty bad.
He found himself on the other side of the mountain from his car, which he thought he was only a mile away from, but ended up taking 7 miles worth of walking to get back to.
Dang.
Now, when he didn't return the first day as planned, his fiancée called the police worried about his whereabouts. Police found him the next day, thankfully, when he got back to his car. But, I mean, his could have been another disappearance story.
Thank goodness he did finally make it back to his car. So, Bill, is it time for some headlines?
My headline is from worldatlas.com by Shane Fraser, dated February 9th, 2024. And I just thought this was kind of a neat list. Offbeat towns to visit in Vermont.
Oh, here we go with the list thing.
Bennington was one of them. I left Bennington off, so. Now, some might consider Vermont to be one big town, but in truth, it's one medium-sized city, several small cities, and about 250 towns. And then, of course, some rugged wilderness mountain terrain. These are the best off-the-beaten-path towns in Vermont to visit. Northfield, a town of 4,000 in central Vermont, is known throughout the state for its covered bridges and its military college. It's also known for its pigman.
Pigman.
Legend has it that a half-man, half-pig roams the woods around town, particularly near a place called the Devil's Wash Bowl.
Love it.
I like that.
I love it.
A trip to Northfield can take you through the beautiful bridges while you search for the pigman. Of course, we talked about Bennington. It's in southern Vermont, so I'm not going to cover it.
They have heard that the pigman smells like bacon.
Then there's Waterbury, where you might scream, but not in terror, like in Bennington. You might scream for ice cream.
Oh.
This is the home of Ben & Jerry's.
Oh, my goodness.
With their factory located in the Village Historic District. It's open for tours, and they have a flavor graveyard where they have tombstones for discontinued flavors, such as Vermonty Python and This Is Nuts.
Oh, my goodness.
It also has breweries for cider and India Pale Ale, as well as beautiful scenery, like what you can see atop Camel's Hump Mountain.
Camel's Hump Mountain.
Now, Glover is for you if you love bread, puppets, and the everyday life.
And who doesn't love bread and puppets?
This northern Vermont town, it butts right up to the Bread and Puppet Theater and the Museum of Everyday Life. The former is a performance museum that puts on puppet shows with radical political messages made palatable by complimentary bread and aioli. The latter is a self-guided tour of ordinary life, a museum that features everything from safety pins to toothbrushes to gas cans. Okay.
Got to be known for something.
Proctor is not too far from the one genuine castle in Vermont. Wilson Castle, that was built in the 1800s for American English aristocrats, sits on West Proctor Road and hosts tours, parties, weddings, and ghost hunts.
Ooh, nice.
The castle contains European and Asian antiques, and it also serves as a museum, as does the Vermont Marble Museum in Proctor proper, which honors the town's marble harvesting past. Proctor's famous marble was used to construct the Marble Bridge, a National Historic Place over scenic Otter Creek, providing the town's east entrance. I like this one. Thetford is home to the Vermontosaurus.
Vermontosaurus.
Now, sadly, this is not a real kind of dinosaur rampaging through the town.
Oh.
This is a 122-foot long, 20-foot tall sculpture at Post Mills Airport in Thetford, Vermont, built out of scrap lumber by a team led by Brian Bolin, a hot air balloon operator who died in his 11,000th airborne hour in 2021. I spent a lot of time in the air.
Experienced.
He left his mark not just with the Vermontosaurus, but with its baby and other smaller installations on the grounds of the airport. Brattleboro was named for William Brattle, a major general during the American Revolution. The town's history runs deep, and the water is not exactly clean. Beyond colonial warfare, Brattleboro began the Vermont Asylum for the Insane in 1834. Now, the asylum was quite progressive for the time and treated its patients like people rather than animals or demons. It did, however, experiment with electroshock therapy, so there's that. Now a National Historic Place, the asylum is still in operation, now known as the Brattleboro Retreat, and is, lacking any shocking treatments. A tower and graveyard from its original iteration can still be accessed. 12 miles east of town, in the New Hampshire woods, is another cryptic ruin, the crumbled castle of Madame Sherry, a Manhattan costume designer who threw lavish parties for her elite friends out in the Vermont wilderness. And then we have Jay, which is so far north it straddles the Canadian border. There's a lot of open space there, which is why it became the testing ground of the super secret and super controversial Space Research Corporation, A 172-foot super gun was just one of the high-altitude weapons found on the grounds.
172-foot long gun. That's, wow, that's a big gun.
This began as a joint American-Canadian government operation that went private and ran from the 1960s to the 1980s, and resulted in the imprisonment and assassination of its arms smuggling operator.
Ooh.
Shelburne is 7 miles from Burlington, but might as well be a world away. Shelburne Farms is a 1,400-acre farm on Lake Champlain and has everything from cows to sheep to an inn dating back to the 19th century. Just a couple miles south of the farm is the Shelburne Museum, which spans 45 acres, has 39 buildings, and houses 100,000 pieces of folk art. Take another trip south, this time to the tiny community of New Haven, and you can search Evergreen Cemetery for the grave of Timothy Clark Smith, who was buried in 1893. Now, you can't miss it, because due to his fear of being buried alive, he had a window put in his crypt.
Okay. Vermont's got some weird, creepy stuff going on.
Yeah.
Well, my headline I took from CBS 12 News of Milwaukee. Online, they published an article Monday, August 21st, 2023, by Skylar Shepard. And this just kind of goes back to our love and the constant belief of triangles. This one is another story of the Bermuda Triangle. Off the Eleuthera Islands in Bahamas, time is of the essence for a missing plane last seen flying over the infamous Bermuda Triangle. United States Coast Guard said the search continues for a missing plane last seen over the Bahamas. The small plane, a Cessna 402, was reported leaving the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. The aircraft, with one person on board, was last seen 17 miles west of the Eleuthera Island in the Bahama area on Saturday. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force and the Coast Guard crews are assisting in the search efforts for possibly the downed plane. Again, they were following this plane on radar, and it just blipped to non-existence. According to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, that's a mouthful, for decades the Atlantic Ocean's fabled Bermuda Triangle has captured the human imagination with unexpected disappearances of ships, planes, and people. The Bermuda Triangle stretches from Miami, San Juan to Puerto Rico and Bermuda. So basically we have the 4 points there where we know a triangle has 3, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Some of the ones I shared is kind of more of a blob. However, some form of definitive triangle has been laid out. Purpose of that was just to yet prove again the Bermuda Triangle is a nightmare that just keeps on giving, even quite recently, claiming another victim.
Well, Eric, I have kind of a weird question.
I love weird questions.
Under what circumstances would you want to suddenly and mysteriously disappear?
To avoid taxes.
Yeah, but I mean, like, how would you disappear?
Oh, well.
Like when people are like, oh, Eric was doing this, and then...
And caught me off guard on that one. I got to think here. How would I go about disappearing?
Well, no, like what way would you want to... I'm not saying, like, you get to choose.
Okay.
But, like, if you were going to be remembered as someone who disappeared, like, you know, he was out hunting Bigfoot when, you know, he never came back, or...
I'm following you now. I definitely would want to be taken out during a ghost hunt or a Bigfoot investigation because it would obviously add more to the allure. And, you know, we're not sure what happened to him, but he was doing this. So kind of makes you wonder if Bigfoot didn't snatch him or a shadow person claimed him. That would definitely be the way I would want to go out.
I definitely 100% want it to be one of those ones where, like, a lot of people saw me beforehand and there's no way I should have been able to be like, oh, we saw him walk into the bathroom and then he never came out.
Just vanished. Much like many employees we used to have.
Yeah. I remember those days.
Now, see, I was thinking you might say you were like out on a small paddle boat on the ocean and, you know, a big cruise ship was going by and you were waving and a megalodon come up out of the water and just swallowed you.
Yeah, but you don't really disappear, right? Like, people know what happened to you then.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Mysterious disappearance.
Mysterious
doesn't include being eaten by
disappearance.
sharks.
Yeah, that would be like, the dude got ate by a megalodon. It's been done before.
Down a shark's gullet.
My question, we're going to get creative. So just out of the 3 mysterious triangles we personally have covered here on Nightmares on the Lost Highway, Bermuda, the Alaskan, and the Bennington, although we did mention the Michigan, but
Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan. We'll throw that in there too. So 4 now. Assuming we have been picked up with financial backing, and we were challenged to do a revisit, a deep dive further, personally traveling to one of those 4 locations. Which one would it be? And then what would you hope to gain, or what would be your focus once there? Alaskan Triangle.
One, never been there. I mean, I've never been to Vermont either, but, it seems like I would know what to expect. The Lake Michigan one, not really that interested,
I've been there.
Been in that direction. Bermuda Triangle, yeah, it's just wide open ocean, so there's not a lot of options, But the Alaskan Triangle, there's a lot of wild land, and I think if you're going to find something like Bigfoot, that's the kind of place you're going to find it.
And folks, that is why we do this podcast together, because I also chose the Alaskan Triangle. I think for myself, it just has to be all the boxes are checked. That one of interest for me. You got the Bigfoot-like creatures, you've got UFOs, you've got disappearances, you've got possible portals. But I would like to go to that ghost town of Port Chatham that we talked about in that episode, where so many seem to have had hotspot encounters with this hairy man of the woods. They say that literally attacked that town, was throwing logs and boulders. And I believe there was a canning facility there that it threw boulders through the roof. And for some reason that was really a hot spot. And what really set that spark of interest for me is that is not the typical Bigfoot or Sasquatch. So many people said they would be chasing it with guns. After this thing would attack the town, they would chase it up into the mountains, and it was almost like it would go into a tree and vanish. It was kind of this old druid-like magical creature leaping through portals or something. Yeah, I love that aspect. That whole town was left abandoned in 1950. I would want to go and interview anybody. Obviously at this point, it may even be the children of people that was at the town, and get firsthand from the natives, hear their stories firsthand. And then if I could get Bill to go with me, I would want to go by myself, and maybe a professional scouter, because let's face it, we'd probably both starve out in the woods. 2 to 3 night active ghost hunt at Port Chatham.
That would be amazing.
And then we would come back and share our experience, our real life, firsthand experience with all of our listeners. Well, we are still hoping, with fingers crossed, that we will pick up such financial backing that we will be able to do some deep dives like that. But for now, we certainly appreciate those that continue to listen, to support us. Please share us, watch us on YouTube. You can listen to us through Facebook, on Podbean, so many different sources. Spread the word, help us to spread this podcast.
And I do my best to spread the word, and
as do I.
When I posted episode 120, Owen Benjamin and the Unbearables, we got a comment from Covert Radio, who said they were going to mention us on their next video about Owen. So maybe that'll help spread the word a little bit. And I know that, when the right situation presents itself, I do mention our podcast, and I think I've netted a couple of new listeners here in the last few months. We're getting about 70 to 100 downloads on each episode the first week, which is respectable, but we would love to get more.
But we appreciate each and every one of you who've continued to support us, even our new listeners. Help us spread the news, and we thank you.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this. Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us, if you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us. Reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
To this day, of course, no living soul has seen this soul. Of course, I edit these podcasts, and we're going to get off topic for a moment. One thing I've noticed, you like lists.
I love lists.
1, 2, 3.
I love lists.
And as I'm editing, I edit in an editing software, and so there's a visual, a waveform. And I can always see when you get to a list, because the way you do it, there'll be, 1, and then a pause. And so I'll see this little word and then a sentence and then a word and a sentence.
Blurp.
And I'm like, oh, we're getting to the point where he does his list, which I'm just as guilty of doing lists, but I think you do them slightly differently than I do. Well, you got me thinking. I have actually thought about building a timeline of the things we've covered in our episodes, of like where they fall, and then adding to it every time we do a new episode. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, we don't really have a place to put something like that.
Yeah.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.